You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on the Old Testament historical books. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders, and I'm with Dr. Paul Wegner. He's going to give us the Hebrew word of the day.
Oh, yeah. And I wanted to make sure you know we're talking about 1st and 2nd Samuel. This is
right.
the book we're in. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. This one's kind of neat. It's a name. And here's the Hebrew text. And it's the yellow part. It says, and they called his lad Ichabod. Okay. So it's the word ek, which means where, and kabod. So literally it's where is the glory?
Right.
Okay. This was after Eli falls backward and dies. His daughter-in-law says she's having a child, and she has a child at the same time. And there it is. She calls him Ichabod. Where's the glory?
Right.
And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is it is explained by saying where the glory has departed from Israel. So that's that next yellow phrase there. And that word galah there, I don't know if you can see it there, but the word galah actually can also mean to exile. It's the same word to mean that. It can mean to reveal. It has quite a variety of meanings, but the one here is almost like the glory has been exiled from Israel.
Wow.
And so it's kind of neat. It's after all these bad things happen, the ark gets captured, and they are defeated by the Philistines, and then this happens.
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting passage.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny because the word ek, or the word, the final kaf on the word for ek is not there. It's you catch it in the next word.
Oh.
So it's Ichabod helps you to know what it is, but unless you knew where it came from, you wouldn't know why it's that.
Yeah.
So
right.
Anyway, that's the word for today.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. That's a really good one. I love when we talk about names. That's always such a an interesting aspect, I think, of reading the Old Testament is how people's names contribute to the overall narrative.
Yeah, and this one really fits it well.
Yeah.
All right, are we ready to start the book?
Yeah, let's talk about the shape of 1st and 2nd Samuel.
Okay. First of all, this is my overview for the books, and it's dated, at least the events are somewhere between about 1050 and 950, somewhere in there. Author is uncertain. Purpose is to describe God's work in the early monarchy period. Remember, at this point, they're still in the Judges, and so they're just now finding out that there's that they want a king. You know, Samuel's this go-between person. He's kind of their leader. He's almost like a judge, but he also rules apparently over the whole nation, which was unusual for the judges, right? They seem to be more localized. Yeah. So Samuel seems to be more of for the whole nation, and so you get his up to chapter 8. And then Saul is the one that they choose. They claim they want a king, and God even tells them, here's, explain to them all that it's going to cost you, and they still want it. So, and it's real clear. They say, we want a king just like every other nation. So I'm going, if I have God as my leader, do I really want to be like all the other nations who don't have anything like that? And I'm going, man, what a choice. And Samuel is all up. Oh, go ahead.
Well, and that's a major question that that's a question they should have asked, really, because they kind of have a bad answer that comes out of this, really.
Yeah, it really is. On there, I think like the key verse is talking about that, where they asked for a king. And I've got verse 8:7 says, and the Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, they have rejected me from being king over them. And so that makes it real clear. Okay, let me just show you. First Samuel has like 3 parts to it. It has Samuel's early years, like chapter 1 through 7, and then Samuel and Saul, chapter 7 through 15. Then you've got Samuel 16, Saul and David, and Samuel 16 through 31. And then uh, when David starts once you get into Second Samuel, about the only thing you hear about David is like the early years of his reign.
Hmm.
So he's going through, and it's talking about how that begins. Then you've got uh, David in his court, and then there's an appendix kind of at the end talking about famine and warfare. There's two psalms, his mighty men, and the census, and then that plague that has. So that's
Yeah.
how the book ends. And we're going to take a couple of weeks to go through all this because these books have a lot of information in them, and
Yeah.
it's some of it's not real exciting because it's a lot of it's just here's what's happening in the history of Israel. And
Mm.
some of them are really good because you got David fighting Goliath, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
story you all hear. But then a lot of times it's not that exciting.
Right.
One real key thing, and you can see it in my outline here, is they keep having the war with the Philistines. So you've
Yeah.
got it in chapter 4 through 7. Then you've got it again in 13 and 14. Then you've got it again in 27 through 30. Then you've got it again in 5 through 25, or 5 verses 1 through 25. And when
Hmm.
you get to Second Samuel, to that one, there it is. David. It says that David defeats the Philistines, and then
Yeah.
you don't hear about him ever again. So he
Right.
seems to have pretty much taken care of the issue there. But
Yeah.
I put down in there the Philistines seem to be a major,
Yeah.
their
Opponent.
major enemy during
Yeah.
this time period.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so that's kind of what you've got.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. There's some key ideas in the book. You're going to have the institution of kingship, which
Hmm.
we've already talked about, the importance of the Davidic line.
Yeah.
This is more when you get into Second Samuel,
Hmm.
but basically, Saul's line only lasts one generation.
Yeah.
But then after that, David takes over, and his offspring are going to be, at least in Judah, from then on, are going to be the kings. So that's pretty important. And the importance of divine kingship, I think that's crucial there too, because
Mm.
chapter 8's really clear. They've abandoned me. They don't. It's not you, Samuel, that they're against. It's against
Yeah.
me. And
Right.
and that from there on, it's downhill.
Yeah.
I would expect.
Yeah.
The names for the book of Samuel are kind of interesting. We've got in the English Bible, you've got First and Second Samuel, and then First and Second Kings.
Hmm.
But in the Hebrew Bible, you got Samuel A and B, and then Kings A and B. And in the Septuagint, you've got Kingdoms 1, Kingdoms 2, Kingdoms 3, Kingdoms 4. So
Oh,
they all have the
interesting.
same title. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it is interesting the different names for the book depending on
Yeah.
which book you're in.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, purpose. These books are not merely for historical purposes, though the history it records must be accurate to fulfill its purpose. The main intent is theological, but if historically it's incorrect, then you could also question its accuracy on the theology.
Right.
So, if part of it's questionable, then it seems like you could question other parts of it too.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's really important. But the whole purpose of these books is to see what God's doing with the nation. And remember how when we were in the wilderness wanderings, how God was teaching them through a bunch of things?
Yeah.
You've got the same thing here, only God's using Samuel or Saul or
Hmm.
David to teach him things.
Yeah. So it's a bit
So
like Joshua, like the book of Joshua in a way.
yeah, good. All right, it starts in chapter 1 with
Hmm.
Samuel and Eli. Um, uh, it starts off in verse 1. Now there's a certain man from Ramathiath Zophim from the hill country of Ephraim, and his name is Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, and the son of Zuph, the Ephraimite. It makes it real clear he's an Ephraimite, and he has two wives. The name of one is Hannah, and the other one is Peniah. And Peniah had children, but Hannah had no children. So that's kind of setting us up for this story. So a couple things that are really important. He lives up in Ephraim, and he's
Hmm.
real close. If you can look on the map, he's real close to Shiloh, because he's going to go to Shiloh to offer gifts once a year, or I assume it's every year.
Uh-huh.
And so that he's got to be close enough that he can get there.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's important. But then the next thing that's important is he's got one wife that has children, the other one that doesn't.
Mhm.
Hannah's going to be our main character for a couple of chapters here.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. Now this man would go up to from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord there. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had closed her womb. Do you remember what a double portion is, Tyler?
I think it's isn't it for the firstborn?
Yeah, good. We're going to look at that in a minute. So, first of all, the name of okay, so you've got Eli.
Yeah.
Eli probably means God is exalted, okay, or something. And L is probably a shortened form. It could just be my God too, Eli. But it's funny. Hophni and Phinehas both have Egyptian names. Hophni seems to be tadpole, and Phinehas is black people.
Interesting.
So, yeah, these are, and you're going to find that at this point, remember, quite a few of the people are coming out of Egypt, and so it had quite a significance, and often with the priestly line, or who are the priests, often have these kind of characteristics. So it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Today, if you go to Shiloh, there's I've got a map here, and they found where the tabernacle would be.
Okay.
So it's kind of where I've drawn on that picture. So it's interesting. They think they can even figure out that today.
Yeah.
All right. So Hannah, he would give a double portion, all right, because he loved her. Deuteronomy talks about giving a double portion of all you have to your firstborn. Yeah. And then it says, for he is the beginning of his strength, and to him belongs the right of firstborn. My understanding is that the firstborn then would also then have the responsibility of taking care of all the women in the family.
Sure. Right.
So in that case, you can see why he would get a double portion. It would be he need that. Mm-hmm. The next passage that's really interesting about this is in 2 Kings 2:9. When they crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I should do for you before I'm taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." Do you remember that? And then Elijah seems to be ticked, like, you're asking a really hard thing. And so I don't know if you remember, but Elijah seems to give up early. And, he has this fight with the prophets of Baal. And in that case, he does wonderful. But then Jezebel comes after him and he flees and he gets really discouraged. And God talks to him at that point, and it sounds like Elijah is given up. So he's not old enough to stop being the leader, and yet he's given up. And God tells him, okay, go and anoint your next person, which would be Elisha. And then also, I think there was two kings. He's at least one king. He's supposed to tell Syria and the northern kingdom, the next kings that are going to be there, anoint them. So I'm wondering if the double portion means enough portion that it will last throughout his life and not just part way through.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why that bothered Elijah so much, because I would have thought, that's a pretty good thing to ask, especially if Elisha is asking it so that he can be a man of God for his whole life. Yeah. Elisha is kind of interesting. Do you remember Elisha, that he's buried, and then in this tomb, and some people there's a battle going on, and some people throw a dead body into Elisha's tomb, and the guy comes alive?
No, I forgot about that.
Okay. That's a story. Interesting. But I think that actually fits this really well. Yeah. So it's showing that Elisha not only had God's Spirit during his lifetime, but there was still enough that when he had died, he can even display God's Spirit. So I'm thinking that those two ideas are connected, so that you've got the double portion, making sure it lasted not only through his life, but even afterwards. Yeah. So I think that at least that helps me to understand, I think, what's going on there. Yeah. All right. Okay. The other thing I want to make sure you guys know, or that you know, is that barrenness was a real problem in the ancient Near East, especially. If you didn't have children, you had no one to remember you after you died. No one would take care of you when you're old. No one would help you make a living. and then no one would to carry on your inheritance. So for a wife to not be able to have children is like a really negative thing for them, because
Mm.
it affects the whole nature of the family and even the carrying on of the family.
Right.
So even though he had two wives, it's I think it's important for Hannah to have a child so that her offspring would carry on Eli,
Mm.
Elkanah's line.
Yeah. Right.
So so I think that's what's going on there.
Yeah.
All right, so she actually goes and verse 11 says, and she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, will you indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me? And do not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son. Then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall not come on his head. Now it came about as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, but only her lips were moving. But the voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Then Eli said to her, how long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine
Mm.
from you. Now, let me just stop. Remember, this is just after the time of the judges, or, right at the end. You
Yeah.
know that the time of the judges was a really bad time. So he's
Right.
thinking he would have never thought that she's speaking to the Lord. He's thinking she's drunk.
Oh.
And that
Right.
makes sense given the context too.
Yeah.
All right, so Hannah responds and says, oh, no, my Lord, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. And that's when she asks, when she says he's going to be, not a razor will come upon his head and stuff like that. My guess that she's saying that he's going to be a Nazarite,
Mm-hmm.
even from his birth. So remember, we've talked about the Nazarite vow, and they would not drink any wine and not
Right.
shave their heads, and then the hair that grew, even we think Paul did it in the New Testament,
Mm.
and when his hair grew out, he was going to cut it off and offer it up to God. So the idea of a Nazarite, even from their birth. So Hannah says, I want a child, but I want to dedicate it to you right
Yeah.
from the start. And
Yeah.
so I'm going, yeah, it's kind of amazing. And so that's
Yeah.
where Samuel comes from. And so
Yeah. Right.
all this is background as to how he got there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. Verse 20, it says, and it came about in due time after Hannah had conceived that she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, because I have asked him from the Lord. Now, you would have thought that the word Samuel then would come from the word to hear or something like that, or even from ask. But
Yeah.
as far as I can tell, it means something like his name is God, or
Hmm.
God is his name, or something like that. And so maybe it more emphasizes the idea that he's dedicated to God.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, she says, then the man Elkanah went up with his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned. Then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever.
Hmm.
Wow. First of all, that's got to be hard on a mother, right?
Yeah.
She probably will see him then once a year, and it sounds like she brings him clothes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's got to be hard. I mean,
Oh yeah.
her only child, at least at this point, is now going to be in a place where she's never going to see him,
Yeah.
at least not very often.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now weaning probably happened a lot later there,
Mm.
at their time. This is a guess, anywhere from about 5 to 6 years, so that
Okay.
they made sure that the child would live, because
Yeah.
probably child mortality was really
Right.
rampant in that time period. So they wanted
Yeah.
to make sure he lived. So, but remember, she's going to leave him there. So it could have even been a little older before
Yeah.
she did. I mean, for Samuel to have for Eli to have a child that he's got to take care of at 5 or 6 years of age, that's going to be really hard on him. So I
Yeah.
assume maybe he's even going to be a little older by that time
Yeah.
when
A
she's
bit
brought
more
him to him.
independent. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that part's, I think, really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, in chapter 2, then Hannah prayed and said, my heart exalts in the Lord. My heart is exalted in the Lord. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. This is commonly what's called Hannah's prayer.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if when it says, my mouth speaks boldly against my enemies, I wonder if that's Paniah. Because remember, Paniah
Oh,
had picked on her so
yeah.
much. Oh, then there's no one holy like the Lord. Indeed, there is no one beside you, nor is there any rock like our God. Boast not, no more so very proudly. Do not be arrogant, or arrogance come out of your mouth. Or the Lord is a God of knowledge, and with him actions are weighed. And then this next phrase I think is really important. Even the barren gives birth to seven, but she who has many children languishes.
Hmm.
Again, that may be going against Paniah again. Now,
Yeah.
later on, we find out that Hannah does have more children, and it even mentions who they are, but it doesn't say that there's seven. My guess
Hmm.
is that that just means a person who has got a full measure of
Yeah.
children, because seven was often thought to be a full
Completeness
amount.
or yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's probably what it's going on.
Right.
But that whole the whole first part of that chapter is what commonly called Hannah's prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then the rest of chapter 2 and 3, we learn about Eli's sons.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not great.
Okay. Yeah. It talks about how wicked they are.
Yeah.
And it talked about how they would take the meat before it was offered to God.
Right.
Verse 12 says, and the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. Then verse 17 says, thus the sin of the young man was very great before the Lord, for the men despised the offering of the Lord. But verse 18 says, so this next verse, now Samuel was ministering before the Lord as a boy wearing a linen ephod. So here's a child. He's an Ephraimite, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't know that he's in the line of Levi. So it's
Right.
interesting that he's wearing a linen ephod means he's doing the job of a priest, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So I thought that was interesting. Then verse 21 says that the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. So at that point, now she's got 6 kids,
Yeah.
still not 7. So
Right.
so
Right.
I still think it just means she's now feels like she's very blessed from God.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's it.
Yeah.
All right. Eli rebukes his sons, but he doesn't stop them. I was actually kind of surprised. I
Yeah.
would have thought that as a priest and as a father, you would make sure they weren't doing these things because you're doing it against the Lord. He even
Yeah.
now verse 22 says, now Eli was very old, and he heard all that his sons were doing in Israel, and how they lay with women who served at the doorway of the tent of meeting. And he said to them, why do you do such things, the evil things that I hear from all these people? No, my sons, for the report is not good which I hear the Lord's people circulating. If one man sins against another, God will mediate for him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? Do you see
Hmm.
what he's saying? Is the priest's job was to be an
Yeah.
intermediary between normal people, but
Right.
he's a priest. So
Yeah.
who's going to intercede for him?
Yeah.
But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for the Lord desired to put them to death. I assume their hardness of heart was so strong that God
Yeah.
was ready to punish them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Do you see
Yeah.
what's
Oh
happening?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that gives you some clue already. Here you've got a really wicked time. The
Mm-hmm.
the priesthood is really bad,
Yeah.
and here
Corrupt.
comes
Yeah.
Samuel. God brings another person along to be a priest for him that's actually godly.
Yeah.
And that's why that's why I think he's kind of an intermediary between a judge and a
And the
king,
king.
because
Yeah.
he's almost like a judge and a priest, because he's doing the kind of things that priests do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting, but Hannah was quite a woman. She dedicated her son, and wow,
Yeah. To
God's going
give
to
him
use
up
him
too.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a man of God that comes to Eli and says to him, thus says the Lord, did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in the bondage to Pharaoh's house? And did I not choose them from all the tribes of Israel to be my priests, to go up to my altar and to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of Israel? Um, the fire offerings, as I understanding, remember the priests would get part of the burnt offerings.
Yeah.
So part of it was offered up to God, but the priests had the rest of it to keep them alive. And I think that's what
Yeah.
it's getting at. Did I not give your sons the fire offerings
Yeah.
before, instead of taking them all?
Yeah.
Verse 29, why do you kick at my sacrifice and at my offering, which I've commanded in my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by making yourselves fat with the choices of every offering of my people Israel? So God is really
Yeah.
letting Eli have it. But
Yeah.
but you see why? Imagine what the people are learning about God if the
Yeah.
priests are doing this.
Right.
So
Right.
so it's really a sad
Yeah. It's a
situation.
terrible state.
Yeah. In chapter 3, now it says, now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days, and visions were infrequent. And it happened at that time that Eli was laying down in his place. Now his eyesight had begun to grow dim, and he could not
Mhm.
see well. Then you remember the story how God calls to Eli, and
Oh,
to
yeah.
Samuel, and
Yeah.
and two times he comes running to Eli and saying, "Okay, what did you want?" And he said,
Yeah.
says, "I didn't call you."
Yeah.
So then finally the third time he says, "Okay, I figured out what's going on. Next time, just say, your servants, here
Yeah. I can hear you.
it's
And
from the
yeah.
Lord, and says, just may, speak, Lord, for your servant hears." And
Yeah.
so actually at that point, God tells Eli of Eli's punishment. In verse
Mhm.
13 says, I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves and he did not rebuke them.
Mm.
So that's a pretty serious charge.
Yeah.
But we know the history, so we know that's really true too.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, in chapter 4, it's starting to talk about the war with the Philistines. Remember, Philistines are going to be that major enemy that just keeps
Yep.
popping up.
Hmm.
Well, this time the Israelites are losing. And so they think, oh, let's take the ark into battle. And I thought was interesting on that story, even the Philistines are scared to death. Right. So they have
Yeah.
to
Right.
encourage one another to tell them, no, fight strong, encourage yourself, fight strongly, or else
Yeah.
we'll be the servants of the Israelites. And
Right.
so they're even afraid.
Yeah.
Um, it happens, they actually lose the battle at Ebenezer.
Hmm.
And this is a picture of the tell of Ebenezer, what's left of it today.
Yeah. Not much.
Not much. Okay, then you've got Aphek is basically where the battle happens. Then
Hmm.
the ark is taken to Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. Let's keep going because that story is really interesting. Okay, they're still defeated and the ark is captured. Eli finds out that his sons die and the ark was taken. He fell over and died. It says he broke his neck because Eli was so heavy.
Hmm.
Then the daughter-in-law bore a child named Ichabod. The glory has departed. So that's where our Hebrew word came in today.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the Philistines have problems with the ark and finally want to give it back. Remember, it keeps
Oh,
bringing
right.
boils or something upon
Yeah.
them,
Yeah. Yeah.
so they want to take it back. They've had
Is
it
this
enough.
also? Is this also when some of their representations of the Philistine gods are also like falling apart or falling down? Is
Yeah,
that the same
yeah.
thing?
Remember, it
Yeah.
is.
Like it
Remember,
falls down on its face before it, right before the ark, right?
yeah, and then the last time it falls on the threshold of the temple, and it breaks off his hands and
Oh,
his head.
right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
So I've got here Dagon is defeated before
Mm.
God, and it was that story about it falling over.
Yeah.
So if they didn't get that message when they come in the next morning, it's bowing down
Right.
to the ark of the Lord, and then so they set it back up. The next time it falls down, it's broken. So
Right.
yeah. So finally, they want to send it back. Now, it almost makes it sound like the ark could have gone to all the 5 cities.
Mm.
Nobody wants it. It mentions Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron,
Hmm.
but there were 2 more cities. And remember, they make 5 boils and 5 things. So it would have been to
Yeah.
each. It could have been to each of them. We don't know. It's very possible that the biblical story condenses it and doesn't talk
Mm.
about these other 2 cities, or it could be that Ashdod and Gaza said, "We've had enough. We don't want it.
Right.
Send it back." So
Yeah.
maybe it's very true. They just didn't need to go to all of them.
Yeah.
Anyway, we don't know, but we know about the 4 the 3 that it goes to.
Hmm.
Um, 1 Samuel 6 says, now the ark of the Lord had been in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. Now, that seems like a long time for us. But imagine if you were a Philistine and for 7 months you're being basically tormented by
Yeah.
God. I would have thought at some point we say, let's get rid of this thing. Okay.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
Philistines called for the priests and diviners, saying, what should we do with the ark of the Lord? How can we send it back to its place?
Hmm.
And verse 19 says, and he struck down. Oh, wait, before I do that, the way he does it is kind of interesting. Remember, the priest says, well, let's put some milk cows on a cart and we'll put the ark on
Oh,
there. Now,
right. Yeah.
what he's thinking in his mind is, oh, okay, what I'll do is I'll make sure that the gods, or that they know that the gods aren't really wanting to send this back and that we should keep it. So he takes these milk cows, puts them in a barn, and he expects, so those milk cows would just start heading off. They'll hear their calves. That's what milk cows means, that they have
Right.
calves. And so
Yeah.
that they would have come right, just circle right back. That doesn't happen. And those cows are lowing all the way back to
Right.
the Beth Shemesh. So,
Right.
so it's God took care of that and made sure that the Philistines knew that, yes, it's time
Yeah.
for it to
Get
go
rid of
back.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Verse 19 says, in chapter 6, and he struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck down all the people, 50,070. And the people mourned because the Lord has struck the people with great slaughter.
Hmm.
Now, some people have said that Beth Shemesh is a small city. So there's no way that there would have been 50,000 people. So they've tried a lot of different ways. Some have said 50 men and then 70 oxen, because the word aleph can also mean thousand, or it can mean oxen. So
Oh, okay.
they've said, but part of me says, why would oxen be punished for something the men did? That's the first
Right.
problem I have with that.
Right.
But then another thing, here's the ark of the Lord that's been gone for 7 months, right? So I would have thought that the people would have wanted to see it returned. So
Hmm.
I can actually see. So I bet it's not just the people of Beth Shemesh. I'll bet the people came from all over to look. And my
Oh,
guess is,
that's an
Beth
interesting
Shemesh
idea.
is in a lower, kind of in a valley. It's walking through a valley. So is it possible that the men, or the people, could have been around the side, and so it was possible to maybe look and
A
even
crowd
get some
gathered.
kind of a glimpse from it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
That's
know
an interesting idea.
50,000 people sounds like a lot. I agree,
Yeah.
but I, it is the normal way that numbers are done. So I do think
Hmm.
it's probably correct, and I at this point haven't got a really good reason to question the
Yeah.
number there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so anyway, that's where they are in Beth Shemesh now, and you can see on our map where it was. Then in Samuel 7:1, it said, for Samuel 7:1, it says, and the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord and brought it into the house of Abinadab on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. And it came about from the day that the ark remained at Kiriath Jearim, that the time was long, for it was 20 years, and all the house of
Wow.
Israel lamented after the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of surprised. It now, Jerusalem is, maybe it's 12, 13 miles from there.
Hmm.
So it's close, but it's not where it's supposed to go. Now remember, Jerusalem at this point is where David has his center, his center of, actually David's not even gonna be here yet, is he?
Right.
Later
Right.
on, we're gonna find out that he's gonna take the ark into there. But
Yeah.
so at this point, for 20 years, it's outside, and it sounds like Kiriath Jearim is being blessed all this time. So I would
Mm.
think, and that's what's going to trick or force David to want to bring it in. We'll see it in Second Samuel. It's a really interesting story, and we'll get to that very soon. Okay.
Okay.
On my PowerPoint, you can see what they think the ark looked like. So that's
Yeah.
they're supposed to be carried with. Remember, the Philistines were doing it incorrectly. They were supposed to be carried by people.
Yeah.
Two men holding the each of the
Those rods.
rods. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's how it was supposed to be done. And they put it on a new cart,
A
and
cart.
had
Right.
oxen doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's being done wrong. And that's going to be important later too.
Yeah.
All right. Now we're almost up to chapter 8. So in chapter 7, the very last part says, then Samuel spoke to the house of Israel, saying, if you return to the Lord with all your heart, remove the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your hearts to the Lord and serve him alone, he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. Let me just stop there. Do you see what it's saying? These Israelites were serving the false gods and all that.
Right.
And he
Right.
says, what did you expect? Of course God's gonna give you over to the Philistines. He even promised that in Deuteronomy,
Yeah.
that your
Right.
enemies are gonna overtake you if you don't trust me and if
Yeah.
you don't serve me.
That's
Verse
right.
4 says, so the sons of Israel removed the Baals and the Ashtaroth and served the Lord alone. So at least for a little while, they got rid of their false gods
Hmm.
and were actually living like they were supposed to.
Yeah.
At that point, then Israel defeated the Philistines. So
Mm.
Samuel prayed for him, and they got the message. And it happened at Eliezer. Remember, we saw that on the map.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
Eliezer means stone of help.
Mm.
Ebenezer is where it comes from. If the Israelites would have only obeyed God, then he could. That was a brilliant story that let them know that if you obey God, God will lead you and take care of you.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. Right before they call for a king, they could have. This is a
Yeah.
good example of what it could have been like,
Yeah.
and they seem to refuse to do that.
That's right. Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. So Samuel was a judge, but they wanted a king in chapter
Mhm.
8. And it pretty much is pretty clear. They've rejected God, their true king. Verse 4 said, all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. And they said to him, behold, you have grown old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Ooh, let me just stop there. Isn't that
Oh,
interesting?
yeah.
Both
Like
Eli
Eli.
and
Yeah.
Samuel had the same problem. And
Yeah.
Eli, I don't know how good Eli was, but his sons were terrible.
Yeah.
But Samuel, we know Samuel was a good kind of judge or leader, and yet his sons came out bad.
Yeah.
So it's sad, but there is no guarantee that your children will turn out godly. And that's, you pray for them, but even these examples in the Old Testament, there was no guarantee.
No, is that part of what Israel is hoping in a king? Is that the lineage will be more like the sons of the king will be good because it's a different
Yeah.
type of leadership structure?
Maybe they were thinking that, but if so, that turns out
That
even
doesn't.
worse.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they really blew that if that's what they thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Verse 6 says, but the thing was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And
Hmm.
Samuel prayed to the Lord. So that's how um, chapter 8, verse 6 is. But then the Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. See, in my mind, that's kind of the crucial verse, right?
Yeah.
Samuel gets all upset because they think they've rejected him. Well, he says, that's not it. Remember,
Yeah.
you're my spokesman.
Yeah.
And basically, you're just speaking for me. So they've not rejected you, they rejected me.
That's
So
right.
yeah. And in chapter 8, verses 11 through 20, there's a long list of all the costs that it's going to be for a king. They're going to
Mm.
take your best sons, they're going to take your best
Right.
land, it goes all the way through that explaining. Um, then you get the story about Saul looking for these missing donkeys. Saul sure seems to be an unlikely leader,
Mm.
and yet because he's handsome and tall, the people choose, or I mean, Samuel actually chooses him, but
Yeah.
it's more of what the people wanted. And I
Yeah.
think that's why he only lasts one generation. He's not obedient. I don't even think he's truly God's choice. I think he's
Right.
more what the people wanted, and God gave them what they wanted.
Yeah.
So at least it's from what I can tell, that's what's happening. Now the next couple of chapters are very hard to understand. I want to kind of explain it to you because I think by reading it you wouldn't necessarily get this.
Mm.
So Saul's anointed in chapter 10, verse 1.
Yeah.
Then Samuel took the flask of oil, poured it on his head, kissed him, and said, "Has not the Lord anointed you to rule over his inheritance?" So you would think now, okay, he's anointed by God. He should
Yeah.
just be made king. But he gives signs. He says, messengers are going to come and tell you about your donkey. Then
Mm-hmm.
somebody else is going to come and give you 2 loaves of bread. And Samuel 6:10 or 10:6 says, then the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you mightily, and you will prophesy with them and be changed into another man. So here's where God's power comes upon him. And remember, we talked about the Spirit of the Lord coming
Yeah.
upon in Judges, the idea of it coming upon him to do a job.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's God's anointing to make sure that he's doing the job he's supposed to.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The people choose Saul. He's anointed publicly, and they all shout, long live Saul.
Mm-hmm.
Saul then goes and defeats the Ammonites in chapter 11. The Ammonite king says, we will make peace with you, but only if we can gouge out your right eye. How many Israelites are going to fall for that one, right?
Yeah, right.
Verse 6 says, and the Spirit of the Lord, or the Spirit of God comes upon Saul mightily when he heard these words, and he became very angry. And he took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout the territories of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, whoever does not come out after Saul and after Samuel, so shall be done to his oxen. Then the dread of the Lord fell on the people, and they all came out as one man. That sounds real similar to when the story in the Judges. Remember at the very end where the priest cuts up his concubine and sends it to all the tribes. But on that one, it sounds like they are going to be made like that, that oxen if they didn't come. This one says we're going to be done to his oxen. So it sounds like they'll chop up their oxen if they don't come to battle. But I guess what we see there is that this is a real clear message that this is one way of getting the Israelites' attention.
Yeah.
And it seems to work. And both of the times they do it, it works.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I just thought that was interesting. On the map, you can see where the kingdom of Ammon was.
Mm-hmm.
So it's over on the Transjordan side. So if you remember, they've got half a tribe of Manasseh and
right.
the other 2 tribes that are over there.
Yeah.
So that's actually taking Israel's land.
Yeah.
So I can see why these guys would be upset and want to have it back.
Yeah.
All right. Then we go to chapter 10. It says that some of the people were not pleased with Saul. In verse 10 or chapter 10, 27, it says, but certain worthless fellows said, how can this one deliver us? And they despised him, did not bring him any present, but he kept silent. In chapter 11, verse 15, it actually says that Saul spared him. After it's over, you would have thought God or Saul would have had some punishment for them. He's wise enough to not do that, because my guess is that by that time they see that Saul did actually deliver him, and so they should probably, at least go along with him. So I think that was so. At this point, Saul finally is showing some wisdom, at least. Like now, later on, he's not going to show that, but at least at this point, he is. And in chapter 12, verses 1 through 5, talk about Samuel passing the rule over to Saul.
Mm-hmm.
At that same time, he makes it real clear. He reminds them that he has done his job well, even though they were very disobedient. He did his job well.
Right.
And so I think that's Samuel making sure that they know it wasn't his problem; it was theirs.
Yeah. You chose this.
Yeah. All right. In chapter 13, verse 1, there's an interesting problem in the text. And I think it's probably an error from copying. I will explain that in a minute. But in 1 Samuel 13:1, it says, now Saul, this is the NASB, Saul was 40 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 32 years over Israel. Mm-hmm. The NESB says Saul reigned for 1 year, and when he became king, and when he had reigned for 2 years over Israel. So they actually, in fact, I think in some of their translations, they put ... to let you know that something has fallen out. We know that he lived 1 year and then became king, and then he reigned 2 years over Israel. That doesn't make any sense. So something is wrong there. Yeah. The NIV says that Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so each one of those have a different thing, but the Hebrew actually doesn't have anything. This phrase, chapter 13, verse 1 says, Saul was a son of years when he began to rule, and 2 years he ruled over Israel. Well, that doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
I think what's happened is there's a copying error, and that in the process of copying it, someone jumped from the first word years to maybe the second one and left out things between them.
Hmm.
So I think those numbers actually somehow got left out.
Oh, interesting.
What I thought was interesting, I went to 2 Samuel 5:4, and it actually says that David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years. I'm
Hmm.
going, wow, that one is real similar to what you've got for this one for Saul.
Yeah,
So
right.
maybe they knew about this, and that caused a problem too.
Hmm.
Now, let me make something real clear though. If the author had no idea how long Saul had reigned,
Yeah.
he wouldn't have said anything, right?
Sure.
So
Right.
why would you even say it if you didn't know? So my
Yeah.
guess that initially it was there, but somehow in the copying process it got skipped.
Hmm.
And even the Septuagint isn't any help here. It's all messed up also.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if they knew about this other verse and they were starting to wonder how long he had actually really reigned. So I don't know for sure, but when I came across that verse, I thought, man, that is really similar to that. So
Yeah, that is
maybe
very similar. Yeah.
so maybe it got goofed up some way.
Hmm.
All right.
That's interesting.
Okay. Yeah. Now, so the question is, how did Saul become king?
Yeah.
All right. First, in chapter 11, it sounds like his victory over the Ammonites, and then he became king. In chapter 10, it sounded like Saul's anointing, and then the battle, and then he became king. But in chapter 10, verse 17 through 24, it says they were casting lots, and the lot fell on Saul. So the question is, how did he become king? Seems like there's multiple ideas.
Yeah.
Well, a guy named Phil Long, who actually teaches for us, did his dissertation on this, and I think he's correct on what he's talking about. He says there are several stages in becoming king. There's a designation, which would be the anointing kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then there's a demonstration, like him doing a battle or winning a battle, so the people realize that he's an amazing king. And then there's a confirmation. So I think what was supposed to happen, he was anointed. That part happened. He was supposed to demonstrate that he won over the Ammonites. That was next. The last thing I don't think did happen. I think I don't know if you remember, but he was scared to tell his cousin or some relative that he had been designated. So because the guy asked, well, what did Samuel say to you? And he just kind of blew it off. He didn't say it. So I'm wondering if instead of doing what was supposed to happen, because then I assume the relative would have said, okay, let's take you to be king. And that part doesn't happen. So I'll show you this next one. So I tried to make us real clear. So these are the three things this is what Samuel expected. So he expected the designation, he anointed him, and the signs.
He did that.
Then the demonstration, go and find what your hand finds to do, and that was probably defeat the Ammonites. And then the confirmation would be, then go to Gilgal, and I will come down to you. So I assumed it was going to be that confirmation was at Gilgal, because he had told him that he was supposed to go there.
Yeah.
But what actually happened is he was designated, he got anointed, he demonstrated, he went and did what his hand find to do, but there was no confirmation. He didn't, at that point, didn't go to Gilgal and get confirmed. That actually happens later.
Right.
So instead, he did not tell about the anointing in chapter 10:16. Samuel has to redesignate him in chapter 10:17 through 24.
And that's the casting of lots?
Yeah, probably. Then he's now has to demonstrate his calling, because that's one of the things he's supposed to do.
Right.
He now has to fight against the Philistines. That's probably going to confirm it. Then Saul goes down to Gilgal, and in fact, instead of obeying, do you remember he disobeys? He was supposed to wait for Samuel to offer the sacrifice, and he doesn't do it.
Right.
So the confirmation, Samuel does come down, but he can't confirm Saul. He says, your kingdom will not endure.
Yeah.
So I think it gets messed up, and that's probably why it looks like it's so jumbled, and you've got multiple confirmations
Mm-hmm.
or I'm sorry, multiple demonstrations and
Yeah.
multiple anointings, or one anointing and one lot thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't, but it doesn't, he doesn't get to the confirmation. And I
Right.
think it's because he disobeyed.
Yeah.
So Phil was the one that worked that out, and I think he did a great job. I
Yeah.
think
That's very
he's right.
clever. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, all right. Then they have this war with the Philistines. Saul's
Mm-hmm.
rejected because he assumes a priestly role. He in chapter 13 says, "I forced myself to offer the burnt offerings," and Samuel says, "Well, you acted foolishly by doing that."
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then Jonathan's victory is in the middle of this. I don't. I've got a picture here of where um, Michmash is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's at the top, and we've got Philistine garrisons at the top of here,
Mm-hmm.
and he goes up and he wipes out 20 Philistines, one person, Jonathan,
Yeah.
and so much so that they start retreating. They start fleeing, and that's when the rest of the people come and come into the battle.
Yeah.
So that's kind of neat. It was in that process that Saul makes that foolish vow. Do you remember? Um, well, I'll read it for you. In the middle of it, they know something is wrong. So he asks God who did it, and so they pull out. They separate out, and Saul's line is taken, and then they choose between Jonathan and Saul, and they know it's Jonathan.
Yeah.
Okay, now verse 43 says, Then Saul said to Jonathan, Tell me what you have done. So Jonathan told him and said, Indeed, I tasted a little honey with the end of my staff that was in my hand. Here I am, I must die. And then 44. And Saul says, May God do to me and more, so for you shall surely die, Jonathan. See, that's an oath, right? He's taking an
Yeah.
oath that he's supposed to kill him.
Yeah.
Verse 45. But the people say to Saul, Must Jonathan die, who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Far from it. That sounds like it's another oath. As the Lord, here it is. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. What's going on? How come? Do you remember Jephthah? His daughter, he makes a stupid vow, and
That's right.
I think he actually kills his daughter.
Yeah.
This one, Saul makes it real clear. He even makes an oath that he's going to kill him,
Yeah.
and then he lets him off. What is going on?
Yeah.
I think that somebody knew about Leviticus 27. Remember in Leviticus 27, there are evaluations if somebody does a foolish vow. I think somebody must have known about that and must have then paid the ransom for Jonathan to be saved.
To settle it.
Yeah. Where, remember, I told you I didn't think that Jephthah was a very godly person and probably wouldn't have known about that.
Right.
Because he lives clear on the outskirts of the land. So I have a feeling no one even knew about that thing for him.
Yeah.
And I think he could have got out of it too.
Yeah.
I just thought it was very interesting. All right. Does that all make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's what we've got there. From then on, it says they have constant warfare with the Philistines during Saul's reign, and that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so Saul in this battle with the Amalekites, Saul is commanded to wipe them out. Verse 17 says, "Remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came out from Egypt, how we met you along the way and attacked among you all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear God." See, that's from Deuteronomy 25, verses 17 through 18. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why God said, wipe them out. To go and wiping out stragglers or sick people that are falling behind the Israelites, that would be like so low. So I think what God's saying, they've just done something that's so despicable, they need to be wiped out. And so he sends Saul to do it. Okay. But Saul spares Agag and the best of the herds. Mm-hmm. In chapter 15, verse 11, it says that God regrets that he had chosen Saul.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? He's the one that anointed him too.
Right.
So it is interesting. All right. So here's a map showing where the Amalekites are and a little about what was going on. But the verse, I think Deuteronomy 18 is the key to why God tells them to wipe them out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The funny thing, it's not here, but You have to go back to Deuteronomy to find it. And it's
Yeah.
funny, it wasn't even in Exodus. So the only place you can find it is
Mm,
Deuteronomy.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Saul spares Agag and the best of the herds. I don't know if you noticed, but it notices he's an Agagite.
Hmm.
In Esther chapter 3, verse 1, it says, after these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hamadatha, the Agagite.
Oh,
So I'm wondering if, because Saul, some of his offspring may have still been alive, so
yeah.
that he actually, remember, they were supposed to wipe them all out. Now Agag gets killed, but I don't know
Yeah.
that all his family got spared.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
or some of them.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Esther seems to have an issue with that too.
Yeah.
All right, Samuel rebukes Saul. I mean, the famous verse, to obey is better than
Yeah.
sacrifice, and obedience than the fat of rams. So
Yeah.
that one's the classic verse. All right, God had taken the kingdom from you and given it to your neighbor. Verse 28 says, so Saul said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to your neighbor who is better than you.
Mm,
We find out who that's going to be is David, but
yeah.
it's interesting the way he says it. So I thought it was also interesting. Let's go to the next one. Um, open theism was an issue probably 10 years ago.
Right.
It's not such a issue now, but it was a hot issue at one time. The openness proponents said that God does not know the future, and they go to passages like 1 Samuel 15:11. I regret that I've made King
Hmm.
Saul king. Well, that makes it sound like God didn't know
Yeah.
that he was going to turn out so bad.
Right.
Then chapter 15, verse 35 says, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. But it's interesting, right in the middle, verse 15:29 says, the glory of Israel, which is another name for God, will
Hmm.
not lie or change his mind, for he's not a man that he should change his mind.
Mm,
So how can you have the two things, God regretting that he made Saul king, and then saying, well, he doesn't ever change his mind.
yeah.
Um, First of all, it seems in my mind, I can regret even though I know something's going to happen. Let me give you an example. When my kids were getting their license, I told them, now don't speed, because if you speed, you're going to get a ticket. And I
Yeah.
remember the first time one of them actually gets a ticket, I figured it, here's God. He knows things are going to happen. I just figured it was going to happen,
Yeah.
but I didn't know that for sure. But I knew that if it happened, they'd have to pay a fine, and I
Hmm.
can actually be sorry for them having to pay the fine and learning the hard way, even though I pretty much knew it was probably going to happen at some point.
Yeah.
So I think God can actually know something's going to happen, but he can feel bad when Saul acts out on his sin.
Hmm.
So I think you can have both things and be true. You can know it's going to happen, but you can also be sorry when it actually does play out that way. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is I don't think those verses contradict and say that God doesn't know the future. I think he does, but he
Yeah.
can still feel sorry when people act out of their sin.
Hmm.
So I think that's at least my explanation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, God is either so belligerent he won't change his mind, or he's
Right.
never wrong, so he doesn't have to. I think it's this latter one. I don't think
Yeah. Yeah.
he's wrong, so he ever needs to change his mind.
Right. Right.
So that's at least my explanation of how it works out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a tricky passage.
All right, here's our questions. You ready for these, Tyler?
Yeah.
All right. In what ways was Samuel a very special person?
Well, there's a couple of things I think in there. I mean, for one, his birth is pretty unique. Um,
Okay.
and he's set aside, his mom Hannah sets him aside, basically
Okay.
dedicates him to the temple, very
Okay.
young, and he goes over there, and then he ends up being a much better inheritor of Eli's role than his own sons.
Good. Okay. Any more?
That's all I got. What else you got?
I was wondering also, he was remember that transitionary person from judges
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
to more like a
To the
king,
king.
because
Yeah.
he's ruling over the whole nation. So I think that's also, there's nobody else like that I know of in that transitionary period. So
Yeah.
that's another thing.
Yeah. He fills a
I
special
also
role there. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was also interesting when he makes it real clear, I've done my job well.
Yeah.
Not all of us can say that, but he was able to say, at the end of his life, he makes it real clear he had done his job well, and
Yeah.
so he can pass over their leadership and feel like he's done his job well.
That's
So I
true.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, number two, was the time of Samuel any better spiritually than the time of Judges?
It sure doesn't seem like it.
It doesn't seem like it, does it? Yeah, that
Yeah.
that would be my exact answer too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially
It,
Eli's sons. That's a bad,
yeah,
and Samuel's
uh,
sons too, I guess, really.
yeah. Okay, next one's a tough one. Why
Mhm.
did Eli and Samuel's children not follow after God?
Hmm. That is a good question. I mean, I don't know there's anything particularly specific about why they don't, but I don't think we're offered any guarantees that anyone's children are going to follow
Yeah,
God.
that's the part I wanted to make real clear because I know
Hmm.
some pastors or some teachers. I mean, sometimes it's because you're not doing a good job, but a lot of times they're
Yeah.
doing a good job and still they're children. And my response is often we don't know what God's going to do later in life, and a lot of
Sure.
times people do come back to the Lord later in life.
Yeah.
um, I just want to make it sure that that there's examples in the Old Testament where even though Samuel seems to be an excellent example, and
Hmm.
yet his children don't follow the Lord.
Right.
So I'm not sure I could say that about Eli, but at least
Yeah.
Samuel.
Yeah.
All right, number four. Why did God allow Saul to be king, even though he knew that Saul would not follow God?
That's a good question. I mean, I think on some level, the answer in the text is the people wanted that.
Yeah.
Even though that was the wrong thing for them to want. That's what they wanted, and so he was gonna give it to them and let them kind of suffer the consequences of that. But
Yeah.
I kinda think
And
for bigger picture, there's maybe other reasons. I mean, because you do also get the line of David eventually kinda comes through this,
yeah.
and that has, further implications down the line, scripture.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? There's a
Hmm.
verse that a statement that Samuel says to Saul, "Your kingdom would have been established forever." So, so when he disobeys, that means his life or his kingdom now is going to be removed from being
Yeah.
the like David's is going to be. And I
Mhm.
just thought that was interesting because man, that's a real significant punishment for
Yeah.
disobeying God, and but I think well deserved too.
Yeah.
So I just thought that phrase is really interesting. Okay, number
Yeah.
five. What does it mean that the Spirit of God comes upon someone?
Yeah, that's another good question. It kinda seems like it reminds me a bit of I think we talked a little bit about this when we went through Judges.
Okay.
God has a specific task for someone to complete. And so
Okay.
there's a power to finish that, God's mission in that circumstance.
Yeah, maybe we should call it an enablement.
Mm,
Does that you said power, but and that's certainly what it is. But I
yeah.
wonder if it's an enablement to do a certain job for God.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
I think that fits well.
Okay.
All right, number six. Why was Samuel a good transition between the time of the judges and kingship?
Hmm. Samuel seems like he does obey God. So
Okay,
I mean, I do think
good,
he's a good leader. It certainly seems like for the people
yeah,
of Israel.
good.
Um, I don't know. What else? Do you have another idea of
Yeah,
why he may be good for that transition?
I think one other thing. Notice that it seemed like he was leading the whole nation and not
Hmm.
just an area in Israel.
Yeah, in a
So
region.
so
Yeah.
in yeah, so in that sense, he's a nice transition into the next step of God then bringing a king.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Number seven. What was the cost of kingship for Israel? We didn't actually talk about that, but
Yeah.
do you remember?
No, well, I don't know that I have a specific answer. I mean, it's my sense is that the cost is it has to be related to their rejection of God as their king.
Okay.
And so, I mean, there's certainly punishment that comes with that rejection.
Okay.
Um, and they end up getting in war and all this kind of stuff. But it does seem like war was also something that was happening anyway. So
Okay.
what do you got for it?
Well, I think besides that, and that was, I think I was just thinking of more mundane stuff of their
Mm.
sons were going to be taken into
Oh, sure,
kings,
yeah, yeah.
going to be under the king. He was going to
Their
use
land, yeah.
them. He was going to take the best of their land.
Mhm.
They're going to have to give taxes.
Yeah,
Some of their best people, like perfumers and people that worked in metal and stuff like that, they're
yeah,
going to take all those, and he's going to be using them. So, but I think your answer is actually better. The cost of was going to be significant to Israel in their offspring, but it was even
yeah,
going to
yeah,
be even worse in their uh, disobedience to God, in that he was now going to show them, he was going to show them what it did cost to disobey
yeah,
God. And
yeah.
and Philistines were a classic example, weren't they?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's how the first part of the book ends. And so now we're getting into, so basically you could see we got to the point where Samuel is now anointed Saul,
Yeah.
and Saul's not going to be now going to take over. The next part that we look at is going to be where Saul is now leading the people and what
Mhm.
happens with them. So
Yeah, okay.
that's where we'll pick up next week.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good to me. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. See you next week.